I'd like to start today off with something that might make you a little uncomfortable. Everyone take a look at the people sitting around them. Probably some familiar faces, maybe not. What if I were to ask you right now to tell those same people your most brutally honest and quite possibly coveted beliefs and opinions? It would be hard, right? The fear of the unknown, the worry that their opinions may differ from your own, the thought that what you might share may put you at risk for a heated argument or rejection. And why do we feel this way? It's no secret that in today's world, personal opinions have become polarized. What I mean by that is, it can be easy to generalize different groups of people based on certain stigma that come along with different beliefs. For example, let's say two people hold contrasting opinions on being pro-life and being pro-choice. Someone on either side of these beliefs could be thinking, this person contradicts me on something that is so crucial to who I am. How could I ever see eye to eye with them? Why would I want to understand their side of things when I know that I firmly stand behind what I believe in, and they probably do the same? Now I want to make something clear. In making this point, I know that I'm pitting two different beliefs against each other, and that's not to say that this is how we should think of beliefs and opinions, but to emphasize the point that this is what our brains do when we generalize. We convince ourselves that any interaction between two opposing sides is impossible, and in doing so, we begin to apply a sort of blindfold. This blindfold makes it so we are unable to see or interact with who or what we may disagree with. By convincing ourselves that any interaction between these two different sides is impossible, we create a divide of misunderstanding. As our nation inevitably grows more diverse, we can no longer afford to generalize others in this way. Instead, we must remove our respective blindfolds of ignorance and engage with one another on a more personal, empathetic, and understanding way. Now, I'll be honest with you. I wasn't born or raised with this mindset. In fact, even after realizing it was something that I needed to implement in my own life, didn't make it any easier to do. I would consider my past self a pro-generalizer. I lived my day-to-day life with a blindfold on for a reason I'm sure a lot of you can relate to: protection. I thought that by keeping this blindfold on and pushing away others who may disagree with me, I was protecting myself and the honor of my family. When I was 5 months old, I was adopted from Guatemala into a family with two moms and an older sister who was adopted from Honduras. Needless to say, I've grown up with a pretty atypical family structure. And when my moms decided to adopt my sister and I, they knew this. They knew that over the course of our lives, as individuals and as a family, we would face different forms of adversity because of our diversity. For example, what would happen if we found ourselves the only two kids sitting in a classroom with same-sex parents? Or in that same respect, what would happen in a low-level biology class when we have to trace our genetics back to mom and dad? With these different scenarios in mind, my moms knew that they had to instill a sense of belonging and pride within my sister and I to love who we are, to understand our diversity as something special. In a way, they kind of taught us that our adoption was a superpower, something that not everyone else was lucky enough to have. One of the ways that they did this was by pretty much giving my sister and I a second birthday. Every year, on the day that we were brought home to the United States, my sister and I celebrate our happy adoption day with cake and presents and other things to help honor who we are. Over time, I developed a tremendous amount of respect for my parents. For things like my happy adoption day, who doesn't love free cake and presents, but more so for the amount of time, patience, and devotion I knew it must have taken to help my sister and I understand our identities in this way. Around the age of 13, however, I can remember seeing different Christian religious groups advocate against same-sex marriage and LGBTQ rights. That feeling of respect that I have for my moms turned into an overarching feeling of protection. Seeing these different Christian religious groups advocate against who my moms were scared me. I remember seeing different protests at the age of 13, like the one behind me, with different churches holding up signs saying that my moms were abominations to society. Telling my moms, the same people who had raised my sister and I to love ourselves, that their sexuality, their partnership was a sin. At 13 years old, this was extremely disheartening. I couldn't quite understand how anybody who didn't know my moms personally could have so much hate and resentment towards them. So I applied a blindfold. I generalized Christianity as this awful, scary thing that would never accept me or my family, so who we are. So why would I need to interact with it? Keeping this blindfold on made a lot of gray area grow around Christianity, a lot of questions, but I did it anyways. Was it fair? No, but it was what I thought was right. I thought by living this way, by pushing it aside, I was keeping myself and my family safe, the people who I love most safe. 3 years later, I became involved in a lot of social justice and diversity work. I had the opportunity to attend many different diversity conferences through my high school, and in December of 2016, I was lucky enough to attend the National Student Diversity Leadership Conference. I didn't know it then, but a conversation at this conference would teach me that living my life with a blindfold of any sort on is dangerous. On the first day of the conference, our group facilitators separated us into small groups for different activities. They told us that the different activities we would be participating in revolve around identity, specifically the 8 core cultural identifiers pictured behind me. They explained that these identifiers are typically the things that comprise someone's identity, that influence them to be who they are, have the opinions that they do, believe what they may. After explaining what they were, they posted these 8 core cultural identifiers on the walls surrounding us on these huge Post-it notes and asked us to stand in the middle of the room. As we stood there, they would read us aloud prompts. Prompts like, which one of these identifiers is most meaningful to you? Which one of these identifiers do you most identify with? Which one of these identifiers do you wish your school talked about more? And me being me, I love this activity. I've always been someone who loves to talk about myself and my identity, my background, one of the reasons why I'm standing here today. But more so because it was fun to interact with different parts of my identity that I didn't necessarily confront on a day-to-day basis. It was all fun and games until they got to the question, which one of these identifiers are you most conflicted about? Immediately, I froze. I can remember standing there in the middle of the room, my palms sweating and my heart racing, because I knew my answer. Religion. Because I had been living my life with that blindfold on, there were so many questions that I had about Christianity. As I mentioned before, I'm adopted from Guatemala, and as I grew older, I began to learn that Christianity, specifically Catholicism and evangelical Christianity, are huge parts of Guatemalan culture. So in a sense, it felt like I was in a bit of tug of war. Part of me wanting to engage with that, to question it, to look into it, to see if that may help me reconnect to my roots. The other part of me, the stronger part of me, wanting to understand what I knew then. What I knew was that I loved my family. What I knew is that I wanted to stand in solidarity with them. So I questioned myself. How do I make these two paths cross? How do I create some sort of solution? And in that moment, I knew that it was time for me to remove my blindfold, to engage with somebody, to tell my story to somebody else and hear what they have to say. So, nervously, I walked over to the side of the room with religion on the wall and waited for somebody to join me. Eventually, one boy came over and joined me under the religion sign. I told my story to him, introduced myself, told him where I was from, and as every word that came out of my mouth, I spoke. I began to feel more and more empowered with what I was saying because of the way that he was listening to me. because of the way that I could tell he was listening respectfully. He wanted to hear what I had to say. And after I finished talking, he paused. He took some time to reflect on what he wanted to say and proceeded. Well, amazingly enough, my family and I are also from Guatemala. However, we view religion as something a bit different. We view it as something that unites us, something that brings us together in times of need, something that we can celebrate over dinner or a holiday. He paused again, looked down. I could tell he was getting nervous. He looked at me and said, "I feel all of these things, and I'm gay." Immediately, all of the barriers I had built up against Christianity came crashing down. I could clearly see that someone who had different religious views than I do was entirely similar to me at the same time. I was able to identify the fact that our identities and our beliefs were intersectional, rather than thinking of them as being polarized. Because we are willing to engage in that equal exchange of vulnerability, we were able to learn more about each other and, in turn, learn more about ourselves. I truly believe that by removing our blindfolds and engaging with one another in this sort of meaningful conversation, we are able to become better, more knowledgeable individuals. However, when doing this, there's something that we must remember in order for it to work. In order to foster an environment where people feel comfortable enough to share these types of personal stories with one another, there has to be a base understanding of respect and willingness to listen. For example, let's say he wouldn't have been so respectful of what I had to say. I probably wouldn't have shared as much as I did. Or let's say either of us let our differences separate us. There would be no way in filling that gap of misunderstanding. If we can't take the time to selflessly understand why people think the way that they do, what causes someone to have the opinions and beliefs that they have, we stand in our own way of learning more about the world beyond ourselves. Now, going back to that question I had asked you all originally, if I were to ask you to engage with one another, to talk to one another, learn more about the person sitting behind you, possibly learn a bit about yourself, would you remove those blindfolds that you have on? If your answer is no, question that. Ask yourself why. Explore that hesitation and know that people like me want to hear your story, just as long as you're willing to listen to mine. I hope that my story can serve as an inspiration to you to take a step forward in the direction of understanding. And I hope that by listening to me today, we can better listen to one another. Thank you.